This is going to be another unscripted retrofitting of a handgun safe video. This is the BulldogVaults BD4055. My plan is to replace the bypass cylinder and then to address another security issue I never talked about before on camera when I first evaluated this thing. I'll try to spotlight this. That green button, that's the reset button. It's accessible by the side of the case. I never demonstrated an attack on that because frankly I've demonstrated this very same kind of attack so many times it gets repetitive, tedious. But this is an issue, so I'm going to try to relocate that button and make it off limits. We'll see how this goes. This housing is made out of plastic. I'm not that convinced that this really provides much protection. There is a steel housing over the top of the latching mechanism, but plastic doesn't really inspire me with confidence. Let me keep going here. Here's what the latching mechanism looks like inside. This is an extremely common assembly. You will find this in the Sentry Safe quick access pistol safes and the Artemis security case. The way it works is that you have a latch and a latch holder or release, and stretching between them is a spring. When the mechanism is in the locked position, the profiles hold each other and they remain stable as long as there's spring tension between them. When the latch holding piece or the release is moved so that they're no longer in a stable position, the spring throws the latch. Anyway, I just wanted to show you this because it's so common, it's simple, it's effective. Back to the case. Here's my first obstacle in trying to replace this lock. The tailpiece has a square shape that's standardized for these cheap little wafer locks. And unfortunately, the piece of hardware I need to use is made to fit right over that. I've got to find a way to make an existing lock accommodate this piece of hardware. I have a lock that I think will work. This is made by Alpha Corporation in Japan. It's a dimple lock with pins in 4 directions. It's got anti-drilling features in the front. Right now it's a right-hand turn lock. The reason I want to use this is that it's got a rotation limiting plate at the back. You just have to slide it up, flip it over, slide it back down, and this will become a left-hand rotation lock, which is what I need. Okay, I've solved my little technical problem, but before I show you the solution, I want to show you how this lock goes from being a right-hand turning lock to a left-hand turning lock. It comes down to this piece right here. It was actually crimped into place and I loosened it in advance so that I could just slide it off and show you that you flip it over, put it back down, and now this is a left-hand rotating lock. Now, how did I solve my technical problem? What I noticed is that this piece of hardware really just needed some kind of a spacer to hold it in place. So what I did was cut a tiny piece of coat hanger wire to drop it in there like that. Now I can put a washer over the top, put the nut in place, cinch it down, and this isn't going anywhere. Now before I fit the new cylinder in place, I have to solve another small technical issue. I'm going to have to grind out some of this hole in order for it to fit. Alright, there's a little bit of a glitch. This bar right here is now extending this direction by just the tiniest fraction of an inch so that it's abrading against the inside of this. So I'm going to have to grind off just a little bit of metal off of this bar. There was something else I needed to fix here. The lock had a lot of play in it. It was slipping up and down. I really wasn't thinking about the characteristics of this lock. This is designed with gaps, wide open spaces at all four corners. And I took out enough metal to let this thing really slip around. So I packed JB Weld into these gaps and let it set, and then I tightened the nut down, and this lock is now solid. It's not going anywhere. So I'm calling this security issue addressed, and I'm moving on. What am I going to do about this reset button issue? The space inside of this housing doesn't leave me a lot to work with. This latching assembly takes up all of this space. Circuitry board takes up space over here. The battery compartment occupies this space, and I'm left with this little compartment. I'm thinking that if I remove this button, keeping the wiring intact, maybe I can point the button this direction. Maybe there's some way I can mount it in here so that it's pointing in this direction so that the owner of this device would access the reset button by opening up the battery compartment, setting the batteries on the foam, and then they could push the tip of a pen in there or maybe a paper clip and push the button that way. Okay, here's what I've come up with. It looks a little silly, but I had an idea that I wanted to try out. I knew that I was going to be filling the hole where the reset button was and that I would leave the mute button intact, so I decided to install some hardware. This is a cam off of a cam lock. I cut a hole here to accommodate the wiring for the mute button, and I cut a notch in the side of it, and I cut another notch in the side of this piece of metal so that the button, which has a ridge on it, the button can just sit in these two notches. And then I also drilled a hole to fasten this in place with a tiny zip tie. So this button isn't going anywhere. And the whole assembly fits in here like this. So now it's time to put this case back together. And at this point, I would say this little project is complete. It functions. It's got a new bypass cylinder. And I will even change the access code right now on camera so you can see how this works. First, I'll show you the reset button now. You can see the little green button hidden inside the battery compartment. To change the access code, you press the power on button, reach in that hole with a pen, tap the button. That's all there is to it. So this device is new and improved. And it comes with the Handgun Safe Research guarantee that I did it myself.